I decided to apply for The Apprentice season 2 and fill out the application, did a video, jumped into Lake Michigan with my suit in the winter in February, and that got me an interview. My business was just starting to succeed, and my partner said, if you go, then I don't think we could do business, so I decided not to go, and I was always very, very frustrated. One day I got up and I booked a ticket and I went straight to Trump Tower. And if I wasn't gonna go to The Apprentice, I was gonna go meet Donald Trump. I get to Trump Tower and there's a security person and the elevator person, and he goes, yes, can I help you? And at that point, my speech impediment came back and I'm trying to say Donald Trump, but I'm like, oh, and I'm trying to say Donald Trump and I can't. And then I looked at it and there was a book on the side that said it was George Ross and Donald Trump's Billionaire Lessons for the Small Investor. And Donald Trump was his right-hand man, George Ross, on The Apprentice, and was on the show. And I said, George Ross.
I met JT quite by accident as far as concerned. He wormed his way somehow into my office, and I was so impressed by somebody who could get past our security and get into my office that I spent the time with him, and then I learned out that I really didn't know him, and he had figured a way to get into the office.
And they said, called George Ross, and they said, come up right up, and they pressed 26th floor, and that's obviously Donald Trump's floor at Trump Towers. And I think the moment I pressed 26, my life really was never the same. Well, first of all, I didn't go there to see you.
I know that.
I went to see Donald Trump and I just couldn't say his name. My stutter came back. And I just remember walking, and when, first of all, I'm like, here's George Ross. And he looked like, how you squint, like who is that guy?
I didn't know. Well,
I wasn't sure.
You said, George,
how are you?
How are you? I haven't seen
nice
you so long. How could I know?
And I said, it's nice to see you. It's, you know what I mean? Because I'd seen you last week on TV, so technically when I say, I just saw you, technically I'd seen you on TV, so I wasn't lying. So it was nice to see you again.
But that's not the way it came across.
Well,
it came across like you're old friends.
An hour conversation and talk about everything. And then after an hour, George says to me, can I ask you a personal question? I'm like, George, we're good friends. Whatever you want. He goes, who the are you? Remember that?
Yeah, I remember it. At that point, I remember the answer. You had trouble getting past the stutter to tell me a logical excuse.
It did clear me out of the office pretty quick after that answer, though.
Well, yeah.
You'd be like, all right, get out, I got work to do.
Sure, but at that point, you didn't have anything to offer anymore.
No, that I didn't have anything to offer.
I thought you came in as a client, potential client, would make a lot of money at this point, but you didn't have it in the first go-round.
So technically, I got fired.
No, I wouldn't say you got fired at that point. You just, we refused future admittance.
Spoken like a true Trump lawyer. The first time I got interviewed on the radio, I kind of fell in love with it. The idea of talking about, what you're doing and what works. And the station, after hearing my interview, asked me if I wanted my own radio show. And I accepted, and I decided to say, you know what, I'm gonna start my radio show and I'm gonna call it Foreclosure Talk Radio. And the radio station didn't really want that topic because who wants to listen to radio? But I figure if I talk about my foreclosures, I bring my successful stories online, it'd be good for business. Plus, I mean, listen, I'm showing successful stories, so how can attack me? And so I did the show for about a month, and then they said, listen, we can't have this show anymore. And that's when I rebranded the show to the JT Foxx Show. The show exploded when this was running for Congress. And if you ask a politician to get on a radio show when it's not election seasons, they don't. But when it is election seasons, they'll do it. So I got 3 members of Congress running for the Republican Party to be on the show. And I called the Speaker of the House, Denny Hastert at that time. So the Speaker, the 3rd most powerful man in politics. And I must have called the office over 50 times. And then they called me back and they said, if we have the Speaker of the House on your show, will you stop calling? And I said, yes. So here you are, I have 3 members of Congress, and I have the Speaker of the United States. There are more people on the line on the show at that time than there were on listening to the radio. And at that point on, it kind of really opened up, and the audience grew, and the respect of the show, because every time I call people, we said, well, why should I be on your show? And I'd say, well, if it's good enough for the Speaker of the United States, I'm pretty much sure it's good for you. We had Senator McCain, And Senator McCain got on my show and he said,
"How you doing, punk JT? Now don't screw this up. You're in trouble."
And here you have the Senator of the United States, Senator McCain, who actually ran for president after, calling me a punk on radio. And it just kind of grew. And we had Don LaFontaine, the movie guy voice.
In a world.
And he'd do me promos. And the show then expanded from Chicago to LA, and then Washington, and in Toronto, and Montreal, and Vancouver, and Houston. And it just kind of, you know, it was a great weekend show, and it was great branding, it was great marketing, and I got a chance to interview some of the biggest names, like Robert Kiyosaki and Gene Simmons, and you know, Ivanka Trump came on my show. A lot of big politicians came on as well, and I really gathered a lot of respect. And you know, that my whole thing was like, who's next in the boxing glove, and it was a great time. Because I got a chance to have a voice, and my whole life nobody listened to me, and all of a sudden people are now listening to me and to my show, so that was a great experience. So at this point I'm a successful property investor, and I've got a successful radio show, and I interviewed a guest named Scott Shield, and got invited to go to one of his events, and there was 500 people there, and he was speaking on stage, and I was just kind of enamored at how people looked at him and how many lives he was changing. And we went to dinner that night together, and he said to me, "You know, you'd be a good speaker." And I said, "Speaker? What do you mean? And you do what I do?" And I said, "Well, I have radio on property investors, and you should try it." And I said, "Okay, you know, I'll do it. I'll try being a speaker." My first speaking engagement, I announced it on the radio. I announced it everywhere I could. And this is a group, a property group. And that night there were 700 people there. And I showed up to speak, and this was my first time. So they never had a big audience. You know, local guy, Chicago, JT Foxx is gonna go over his success story. And so I was actually really, really nervous. And I remember, so I go up and I said, "Hello, my name is JT, and I like you very much." And to do a Borat impersonation, which, by the way, I thought I'd done on the radio many times, and I always thought it was funny, but, you know, no one was there to tell me, and nobody laughed. And then it really threw me off. Then I said, "Only 5 of you will succeed in this room." And there was obviously over 700 people, and people start walking away, and it was just a disaster of a speech, probably one of the worst speeches I've ever given. She said she had more complaints about me speaking than ever before. I didn't understand the power, and because I wasn't connecting. I was speaking at people rather than speaking to people, and people weren't being inspired, and I wasn't connecting with them as a speaker should do. And then when I got my first coach, I think everything kind of changed from that moment. From then on, I'd go through my presentation, and then I start speaking to rooms of 50 people and 150 people, and next thing you know, I was speaking to thousands of people.
He's an excellent speaker. He has the ability to communicate with an audience. I don't care who's in the audience.